Amara moved through her kitchen with an ease that came from years of practice. The scent of smoky jollof rice filled the air, mingling with the soft sweetness of fried plantain and the rich spice of pepper soup simmering on the stove. Her gelly was neatly tied, her dress simple yet elegant, and her smile warm enough to light the whole room. Tonight was special. She had invited her parents-in-law, her siblings, and a few neighbors. The long dining table was set beautifully with bright plates, polished cutlery, and glasses that caught the glow of the overhead light. Everything looked perfect, almost like a scene from a dream. As guests settled into their seats, the sound of laughter rose and bounced off the walls. Children ran about before being hushed by their mothers, while the older men exchanged jokes about politics. Tunde, her husband, poured drinks and charmed the room with his usual humor. Everyone seemed happy, comfortable, at home. The house carried the warmth of family, the kind of warmth that made you believe nothing could go wrong. But in the middle of the noise and joy, Amara's heart carried a quiet weight. She moved gracefully, checking on dishes, refilling glasses, making sure everyone was satisfied. No one noticed the stillness in her eyes when her smile faded for a second too long. She looked like the perfect hostess, the woman who had it all together. And yet, beneath the laughter and the golden light, Amara knew the evening was not as perfect as it seemed. Something unspoken sat heavy inside her, a truth she had not shared with anyone. Tonight, that truth waited like a shadow at the edge of the table. The plates were passed around the table one by one, steaming dishes filling every space. Laughter floated in the air as spoons clinked against plates and conversations overlapped in a joyful hum. Amara moved between her guests with ease, her wrapper swishing softly as she refilled drinks and encouraged everyone to eat. She wanted this night to be remembered for its warmth, for its togetherness. For a moment, she almost let herself believe in that picture. Then she noticed it. Tunde's eyes were not on her. They were not on the food she had spent hours preparing or on the guests who had come to honor their family. Instead, his face was tilted toward the small glowing screen in his hand. At first, she brushed it off. Perhaps it was work, an urgent message, something important. But then she saw the way his lips curved, slow and tender, into a smile that had nothing to do with the people around him. It was the kind of smile that belonged to private jokes, stolen moments, hidden words. And he was giving it, not to her, but to someone else through that phone. Her chest tightened, but she didn't flinch. She forced her lips into the kind of smile a perfect hostess should wear, one that didn't crack or tremble. She laughed at her father-in-law's story, nodded at her sister's question, and kept her hands busy pouring stew over white rice. Only she knew that each second felt like a stone dropping into her stomach. Every now and then, her eyes darted back to Tunde. His thumb moved quickly, typing, deleting, typing again. He leaned back in his chair, his expression lighter than it had been in weeks. He didn't notice her watching. He didn't notice the way her eyes lingered on him longer than usual, as if she were searching for a reason not to believe what her heart was whispering. The room stayed alive with joy, but for Amara, time seemed to slow. The warmth she had carefully created began to feel thin, like a fabric tearing under pressure. She remembered how, earlier that morning, she had asked Tunde if he liked the menu she planned. He had barely looked at her, muttering a distracted, "Yes, that's fine." But now, staring at the soft light on his face, she realized where his attention truly lived. Still, she did not let her mask slip. She poured herself a glass of water, her hands steady even though her heart raced. She kept her back straight, her voice calm, her smile polite. No one at the table suspected a thing. To them, she was still Amara, the graceful wife hosting a flawless dinner. Only she knew that the first crack had appeared, small but sharp. And deep inside, she understood that tonight, something was waiting to break. The dishes were finally set, plates filled, and the room carried that soft hush that always comes when people take their first bites. Steam curled into the air, and the rich aroma of jollof, pepper soup, and fried fish made mouths water. Amara sat down at last, her hands folded neatly on her lap, watching with quiet pride as her family enjoyed the meal she had poured her heart into. For a moment, it felt almost safe again, as though the unease from earlier had been nothing but her imagination. Then it happened. Tunde's phone, which he had carelessly placed face up on the table, lit up with a bright buzz. The screen glowed, catching the attention of more than one pair of eyes. Amara's gaze fell on it immediately, but she wasn't the only one. The message appeared boldly, no room for doubt, no room for escape. "I miss you already, my love. Last night was unforgettable, red heart, Chioma." The words seemed to hang in the air, louder than the laughter that had just died in everyone's throats. Forks stopped midair. A spoon clattered softly against a plate. The room, so full of chatter only moments ago, sank into a heavy silence. It was as if the very walls leaned in to witness the truth spilled out on that tiny glowing screen. Amara's chest tightened, but her face didn't move. She felt the sting, sharp and deep, but her hands remained steady. Around her, Eyes darted in every direction. Some landed on her with pity, others with shock, and a few flickered to Tunde, who suddenly looked as though the ground had betrayed him. His smile vanished, his hand shot toward the phone, but it was too late. Everyone had seen. Whispers started, soft at first, then sharper. Amara's sister looked at her with wide eyes, lips parting but no words coming out. One of the neighbors shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing at the door as if wondering if it was too late to leave. Tunde's father's fork scraped hard against his plate, his jaw tightening, his eyes narrowing. His mother lowered her gaze, her hand pressed against her chest. But all the attention circled back to Amara, the perfect hostess, the graceful wife, the woman who had cooked, served, and smiled all evening. They waited for her to break, to cry, to shout, to storm away. The silence pressed against her like a weight, heavy and unrelenting, as if the whole room held its breath for her reaction. Tunde cleared his throat, fumbling for excuses, his fingers gripping the phone too tightly. But Amara said nothing. She sat there, calm on the outside, though her heart beat so loudly in her chest it felt as though it echoed across the table. The message still burned in her mind. Last night was unforgettable, and in that moment, she knew nothing would ever be the same again. Gasps broke through the silence like glass shattering on the floor. A few women covered their mouths with their hands, their eyes wide in disbelief. The men shifted in their chairs, some coughing awkwardly, others muttering low. Children, sensing the tension but not fully understanding it, went quiet, their spoons hovering over their plates. The joyful rhythm of dinner had been torn apart in one single moment. Tunde's mother's eyes went straight to Amara. Her face softened, almost collapsing with pity, as though she wanted to reach across the table and hold her. She knew what it meant for a woman to be humiliated in front of family, neighbors, and friends. She shook her head slowly, whispering something under her breath that only the person beside her could hear. But Tunde's father did not hide his feeling. His palm slammed down hard against the wooden table, the plates rattling, glasses nearly toppling over. The sound echoed through the room, making everyone jump. His face burned with anger, not just at the message, but at the shame it dragged into his house. "This is what you bring to us," he barked, his voice heavy with rage. "This is what you do to your wife, in front of your family?" His words carried the weight of disappointment that cut sharper than any slap. Around the table, whispers spread like wildfire. A cousin leaned into another guest, murmuring too loudly, "Chioma? Isn't that the girl from?" Her words trailed off when she realized Amara might have heard. Another neighbor's eyes darted between Amara and Tunde, as though trying to decide where their loyalty should fall. No one dared laugh, no one dared smile. The shame was too thick, too raw. Tunde, his face drained of its confident glow, reached for the phone as if he could erase what had already been seen. His hand trembled slightly, though he tried to disguise it. It's not what it looks like," he stammered, the words barely convincing even to himself. It's a mistake, just a joke." He looked around the table, his eyes searching desperately for someone, anyone, to believe him. But all he saw were hard stares and shaking heads. The room's focus returned to Amara. Every pair of eyes rested on her, waiting for the eruption. Some expected tears, messy and unstoppable. Others waited for her to scream, to throw a plate, to stand and storm out. They wanted drama, the kind of scene that would be remembered and repeated for years. But Amara sat still, her back straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't move, didn't speak. The silence she held onto was almost unbearable, so sharp it made people shift in their chairs. Her calmness was not weakness. It unsettled them more than any outburst could have. And though Tunde muttered excuse after excuse, his voice grew smaller, drowned out by the weight of the family's disappointment and the strength of Amara's quiet. The room was heavy, as if even the air refused to move. All eyes stayed on Amara, waiting for her to shatter. Everyone expected the tears to finally come, or for her to raise her voice, throw the phone, maybe even storm out. That was the script they knew, the reaction they had already written for her in their mind. But Amara did not follow their script. She reached for her glass of water, her movements slow and graceful, like nothing unusual had happened. The glass touched her lips, and she took a sip, her hands steady, her eyes calm. Then, with the faintest smile, she looked around the table and said softly, "Shall we continue dinner?" The words fell into the silence like a stone into still water, rippling across the room. A few mouths dropped open. Someone coughed nervously, not knowing what else to do. Tunde froze, his face twisting with confusion. This was not the outburst he had braced himself for. He had prepared for anger, for begging, for explanations. He was ready to argue, ready to defend, ready to shift blame. But he was not ready for this quiet, collected grace. His father leaned back in his chair, eyebrows furrowed, his anger now mixed with something else, curiosity, maybe even respect. His mother clasped her hands together, studying Amara as if she were seeing her for the first time. The neighbors exchanged glances, whispering behind half-raised palms. Everyone seemed unsettled, almost uncomfortable with how calm she was. Amara began serving herself a small portion of rice, her movements neat and deliberate. She asked her sister to pass the stew, thanked her mother-in-law for complimenting the fish earlier, and even smiled politely at one of the neighbors who seemed too stunned to speak. She carried on as though the scandalous text had not exploded in the middle of her perfect dinner. Inside, her heart still ached. The words from Chioma's message were branded in her mind, the betrayal slicing through her like a sharp blade. But she refused to give that pain away to the room. She would not let them see her crumble. Instead, she wrapped herself in composure, every gesture measured, every smile controlled. Tunde shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his phone now hidden in his pocket. He kept glancing at her, waiting for the storm to come, but none arrived. Her silence was more powerful than any scream could have been. It unsettled him, exposed him, made him squirm in his own skin. For the first time that evening, he looked small. The dinner continued, though the air had changed. Guests forced laughter, spoons clinked again, but nothing felt the same. The calmness Amara held onto was stronger than anger, stronger than pity. It was the kind of silence that spoke louder than words, the kind that made everyone wonder, what is she really thinking? And that question hung heavier than the betrayal itself. The dinner carried on with forced chatter and uneasy laughter, but the truth sat at the center of the table like an uninvited guest. Amara remained calm, moving between bites of food and polite smiles, her silence still unsettling everyone. Tunde avoided her eyes, his shoulders stiff, his words few. The rest of the family tried to pretend, but no one could ignore the weight of what had happened. Then, just as the plates were being cleared, Amara gently pushed her chair back and rose to her feet. The room grew quiet again. She smiled warmly, her voice steady as she said, "I want to thank you all for coming tonight. It means so much to me to see family, friends, and neighbors gathered here at my table." Her words carried kindness, but also something deeper, something that made everyone lean in. She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the room. "I also want to share something important with you all," she continued. Her tone was calm, almost casual, but her words carried weight. "The message we all saw tonight, it didn't surprise me. I have known about Tunde's affair for months now." Gasps rippled through the room again, sharper than before. Tunde's head snapped up, his face paling. Whispers filled the corners, disbelief mixing with curiosity. But Amara kept speaking, her voice clear, unshaken. "I decided not to confront it immediately. Instead, I chose to prepare myself. Quietly, patiently." She let that sink in before continuing. "For months, I've been saving, working, building something of my own. I opened a catering business. Every recipe, every dish, every detail has been a part of it." Her smile widened, not bitter but proud. "And tonight's dinner? It wasn't cooked by me alone in this kitchen. Tonight's meal was catered by my company." The room fell completely silent. For a moment, even the children were still. Then came the murmurs, low, surprised, impressed. Neighbors exchanged glances, nodding. Her siblings looked at her with new eyes. Tunde's mother's lips trembled, as though caught between pride and sorrow. His father leaned forward, his anger now replaced by stunned respect. Meanwhile, Tunde sat frozen, his mouth slightly open, as though the ground beneath him had shifted. He had expected her to cry, to beg, to make a scene. Instead, she stood taller than ever, revealing a strength he had never imagined. His betrayal had not broken her, it had built her. Amara's eyes softened as she looked around the room. "So yes, tonight is special. Not because of what was revealed by a phone screen, but because this is the first time I share my work, my independence, with all of you." She lifted her chin, her voice calm but powerful. "I am no longer just a wife holding a household together. I am a woman building her own path." The weight of her words settled over everyone, and in that moment it was clear, the story had shifted. The dinner was no longer about Tunde's shame. It was about Amara's quiet, steady rise. The room was still buzzing from Amara's revelation about her catering business when she gently raised her hand, asking for everyone's attention once more. Her voice was calm, steady, almost too calm for a woman who had just been humiliated minutes ago. That calmness made her words carry even more weight. "There is something else I want you all to know," she began, her eyes not on Tunde, but on the guests seated around the table. "While my husband was busy spending his time, his energy, and yes, our money, on Chioma, I chose a different path. I decided to use my own intelligence and strength to build something for myself." The words landed heavily. Some gasped softly, others shifted uncomfortably. All eyes turned to Tunde, whose face darkened as whispers grew louder. He opened his mouth to speak, but Amara's voice rose just enough to silence him. "For months," she continued, "I watched as money disappeared on gifts, trips, and secrets. But instead of losing myself in anger, I started saving whatever I could from what remained. I put it into my business, into my future. Every naira was stretched, every choice was deliberate. And today, that small seed has grown into something real, something that belongs to me. Her sister's eyes widened in awe. A neighbor whispered, "She knew all along?" Tun's mother pressed her hand against her lips, her eyes brimming with tears, not just of sadness but of pride. And his father, who had moments ago slammed the table in rage, now looked at Amara with something new, respect. Tun shifted in his seat, sweating, his jaw tight. The power that had always been his seemed to slip further away with each word his wife spoke. He had thought of her as quiet, obedient, simple. But now the truth unfolded before everyone. The woman he had underestimated was far stronger, sharper, and more graceful than anyone imagined. Amara smiled gently, not with arrogance but with quiet dignity. "So you see," she said, her tone almost tender, "this betrayal did not destroy me. It shaped me. It reminded me of who I am and what I can do. I am not just the wife who waits in silence. I am a woman who can stand on her own." The family was stunned. The neighbors, once whispering in gossip, now looked at her with admiration. Her siblings nodded proudly, their chests lifted. Even the children, though too young to understand the full story, sensed that something powerful had just taken place. Tun sat small in his chair, his excuses dead on his tongue. For the first time, he looked like the weaker one. And Amara, the woman everyone thought of as the quiet wife, stood tall before them all. They now knew the truth. Her silence had never been weak. It had been strength, patience, and preparation. And tonight, that truth was brighter than any scandal. The table was heavy with silence, every word Amara spoke still hanging in the air. Some guests were staring into their plates, others at Tunde, whose face was stiff with shame. Just when the room seemed like it couldn't bear another ounce of tension, a sharp vibration broke through. Tunde's phone buzzed again on the table. Every head turned at once. The glow of the screen lit up, and the name that appeared was unmistakable, Chioma. The same woman who had already shattered the evening. Gasps spread around the table, louder than before. Tun's hand shot out immediately, but this time Amara was quicker. She reached over, picked up the phone with calm hand, and held it up for everyone to see. The room went dead still. No one dared breathe as Amara swiped to answer. She lifted the phone to her ear, her face serene, her voice smooth. "Hello, Chioma," she said, as if greeting an old friend. A murmur rippled through the room. No one had expected her to actually answer. For a few seconds, only Amara could hear the other side. Then, with a small smile, she spoke again, her tone firm and steady. "You'll need to find another man," she said clearly, her eyes locked on Tunde, "because this one is about to lose everything." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. People sat frozen, their eyes wide, their mouths slightly open. Some looked at each other in shock. Others couldn't tear their gaze away from him. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. Calm, fearless, almost elegant. She didn't yell, she didn't break. She declared it like a truth that could not be challenged. Tun's face flushed red. He half rose from his chair, his voice cracking as he hissed, "Amara, give me the phone." But she didn't flinch. She simply ended the call, placed the phone back on the table in front of him, and returned to her seat as though nothing unusual had happened. Whispers erupted instantly. One neighbor leaned close to another, saying, "Did you hear her? She just told the mistress off like it was nothing." Tun's mother let out a soft, trembling sigh, tears welling in her eyes, not of sadness this time, but of admiration. His father sat back, shaking his head slowly, clearly stunned but impressed at the strength Amara had shown. Meanwhile, Amara lifted her glass of water again, sipping it slowly, her eyes calm. Her silence after the fearless statement carried even more power than the words themselves. No one could deny it anymore. The balance of power had shifted. Tun sat slumped, humiliated, the phone still on the table like a piece of evidence he could not destroy. Everyone could see it now, the affair, the betrayal, and the downfall already beginning. And at the center of it all stood Amara, not broken, not bitter, but steady and unshaken. She had just faced the mistress in front of them all, and won. Tun sat stiffly in his chair, his jaw tight, his eyes darting around the table as though searching for a lifeline. The shame pressed down on him like a heavy stone, but still, he tried to salvage what was left of his pride. Clearing his throat, he forced a shaky laugh. "Look, everyone, this is being blown out of proportion," he said, his words tumbling over themselves. "It's just a misunderstanding. Amara is exaggerating. You know how women can be." The line fell flat. No one laughed. No one agreed. In fact, the silence that followed made his excuse sound even weaker. Amara didn't even bother responding. She simply sat there, her face calm, her eyes steady. The contrast between her poise and his desperation only made him look smaller. Then his father leaned forward, his voice low but heavy with authority. "Enough, Tunde," he said, his eyes hard. "You have disgraced yourself. You have disgraced this family." He shook his head slowly, disappointment etched deep into his face. "I raised you to be a man of honor, not a fool chasing shadows. And now, before your wife, your siblings, your neighbors, and your business associates, you've proven you are not the man I thought you were. The words hit harder than any shout. Tun's shoulders sank, his mouth opening but no sound coming out. His mother closed her eyes, pressing a hand against her chest as though she could not bear to watch her son unravel. And then came the final blow. Among the guests were two men who had been in quiet talks with Tunde about a new business deal. They exchanged glances, whispering to each other, before one of them spoke up. His voice was polite, but the message was cold. Tunde, perhaps this isn't the best time to discuss future plans. We'll be in touch. The other nodded, adding, we believe stability and integrity matter most in partnerships. Tonight, we've seen enough. They turned their attention to Amara instead, offering her small nods of respect, as though she were the true figure of strength in the shift was clear. In just a matter of minutes, the power Tunde had always carried, his confidence, his reputation, his influence, was slipping through his fingers. He tried again, stammering about lies, about people misunderstanding him, but the more he spoke, the more desperate he sounded. His voice cracked, his hands fidgeted, his arrogance melting away until all that was left was a man exposed. Meanwhile, Amara remained silent, her composure unshaken. She didn't need to argue. The truth was already clear to everyone in the room. Tunde had betrayed, wasted, and lied. She had built, endured, and risen. By the end of the night, no one was looking at Tunde anymore. Their eyes were on Amara. In minutes, the man who once thought he owned the room had lost it all, while the woman he underestimated stood taller than ever. His downfall was complete, and he knew it. Amara rose slowly from her chair, her movements graceful, her face calm. The room, still heavy with tension, seemed to pause as every eye followed her. She didn't raise her voice, didn't point fingers, didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her silence, her composure, her quiet strength had already spoken louder than any anger ever could. She placed her napkin gently on the table and looked around, her gaze steady. Thank you all for coming tonight, she said softly, her tone polite but powerful. I believe this dinner has shown us more than food ever could. Her words carried weight, and people nodded slowly, their respect for her growing with every breath she took. Tunde sat hunched in his chair, unable to meet anyone's eye. The man who once filled the room with confidence and charm was now small, exposed, and humiliated. His excuses had failed, his arrogance had collapsed, and the woman he thought would stay silent had risen higher than he ever imagined. Amara lifted her chin, her poise unshaken. She had nothing left to prove. She had already shown everyone who she truly was, strong, intelligent, and full of dignity. Without another word, she turned and walked away from the table, her steps light, her head held high. The guests watched in awe, their admiration clear. To them, Amara was no longer just the quiet wife. She was a woman who had turned betrayal into power, who had chosen grace over anger, and who had left the room not broken but free. Behind her, Tunde was left in the ruins of his own choices. But Amara? She walked forward, carrying only her strength, her dignity, and her freedom.